I shouldn't have opened that box. It was wedged behind a dead-ended corridor in a monastery outside sigils, or a kind of hallway that makes you whisper for no reason. The plaster didn't match. The bricks were younger than the walls around them, as if the building had grown a scab and hoped no one would pick it. Of course I picked it. Inside, a cedar chest glazed with candle soot, a rusted clasp, and the kind of wax that looks like it remembers prayers. I lifted the lid and a smell climbed out. Old paper, tallow, and something like iron in rain. The pages inside were brittle, tight-stitched, and the cover well. I'll spare you the Gothic phrasing. It wasn't calfskin. The title on the first leaf was Latin punched in with stubborn ink. Liber Sanguinis Redemptus, the Book of Redeemed Blood. No catalogue mark, no library stamp, no smug curator's pencil in the corner. Whoever hid this wasn't archiving. They were trying to end a conversation. Now, we all know the easier conversation about Vlad Ţepeş, better known by a name that sells Halloween costumes. The impaler, the prototype vampire, the brand ambassador for eternal darkness. He's useful as a villain because villains simplify life. Light versus dark, saint versus monster, your team versus the other team. But this book didn't tell that story. It told a worse one. Worse, because it's messier. Worse, because it says the thirst that drinks blood can be turned into a thirst that spills it your own so somebody else survives. It suggested the curse wasn't a Hollywood spell at all but a theological glitch, a blasphemous photocopy of the Eucharist. Christ sheds blood to give life. The cursed one drinks blood to avoid death. If that's true, then the cure isn't garlic or steaks. It's surrender. The margins were crowded with handwriting, monks arguing with ghosts. One line trapped me. Sanguis contra sanguinem, blood against blood. Not revenge, but reversal. If you think that sounds like a line invented to make a grad student feel clever, I did too until I noticed how often the phrase reappeared across fragments and letters that should never have met. Here's why that matters for us. On YouTube, in 2025, stories like this test the retention of our attention. Institutions prefer simple arcs. Algorithms prefer predictable arcs. But the human heart, it's addicted to the moment a script flips, when the monster kneels, when the tyrant repents, when the wound becomes the doorway. If we're going to spend the next 40 minutes together, I'm going to earn it by showing you how a legend we thought we knew might actually be a manual for mercy that scared the people in charge enough to bury it. And we'll do it without turning into conspiracy tourists or cathedral vandals. Quick promise, I'm not asking you to believe any miracle on command. I'm asking you to follow the paper trail, burned edges, marginal notes, and a symbol that keeps bleeding through time at woe drops forming a chalice. Also, quick craft note, if you feel me dropping pattern interrupts now, and then quick visual changes, a sideways question, a tease about what's 5 minutes ahead, that's on purpose. It's how we keep your brain's curiosity switch flipped and avoid the slump that makes people bounce. A good hook, intermittent novelty, and never signaling we're done too early are classic retention levers on YouTube. So, the pages said Vlad's last months weren't a power binge, but a fastnet from food, from vengeance. A 40-day oath to lay down the sword until heaven answered. The text claimed he entered a chapel at dawn, buried his blade in the altar, and begged for a different kind of thirst. If that's theater, it's very old theater. The references pop up in places that don't share an index. And here's the uncomfortable part. If even half of it is true, then the neat boxes we keep Dracula in start leaking. He stops being useful as a cartoon villain. He starts buying possible. And if he is redeemable, who gets to sell you forgiveness? Stay with me. We'll walk the ruins, sniff the myrrh and iron, decode the sigil of the twin drops, and ask the question that terrifies empires more than monsters do. Think of the Eucharist as a story told with elements: bread, wine, body, blood, life given not taken. The book in my hands describes a counter-liturgy where the sequence is flipped, blood taken to extend the self, life hoarded instead of offered. It calls this morbus inversionist sickness of inversion. Here's the daring claim: if a curse is an inversion, the cure is an inversion of the inversion. Sanguis contra sanguinem. Not blood feud, not an eye for an eye, the opposite. Your blood cancels my hunger. Your self-gift starves my violence. Now, as a researcher who tries not to be a guileless romantic, I want receipts. The manuscript and scattered references to sister texts sketch a ritual they nickname the Fast of the Shadow, 40 days abstaining from revenge. Why 40? In scripture and monastery schedules, 40 is transformation time, long enough for hunger to argue with pride, long enough for the body to realize the soul actually means it. But don't get distracted by the mystique. What's being proposed is behavioral, not magical. Cut the supply line that keeps your worst appetite fed. Mercy as metabolic therapy. There's a fringe beautiful thought here. If the original Eucharist is God giving blood to rescue enemies, then the vampiric act is stealing blood to rescue myself. The cure, then, is to pour out instead of drink in to make my body a boundary that predators don't cross and victims can rest behind. If you've ever seen a stranger step between a raging man and a frightened kid, you've seen the doctrine in street clothes. This is where we have to talk about transformation for fair use clarity. We're not just repeating an old legend. We're extracting a moral engine and test driving it in modern terrain prisons, truth commissions, hospital wards, schoolyards. That's new purpose and new meaning, the core of transformation. For creators, when you critique, contextualize, and add novel analysis, you're ticking fair use boxes beyond I like, dislike this. Back to Vlad. The pages insist he tried the Fast of the Shadow before his final campaign. There's a line, probably a copy of a copy, that reads, "He pressed iron into wood and swore to spill no more blood unless heaven asked for his own." That's either theatre written by a monk with a flair for drama, or a record of a man who realized that the way out of the labyrinth is sometimes to stop killing the Minotaur and let it kill you. Too poetic. Okay, let's ground it. Multiplicity beats isolation. When phrases, symbols, and ritual descriptions show up in unconnected inventories, letters, and marginalia, your confidence creeps up. Specificity smells like truth, a scent of myrrh and iron, twin drops forming a chalice, wax sigils darkened by smoke. Invented details exist, but they age differently than cliches. Institutional reaction is data. Sealed vaults, apocrypha demonica labels, sudden disappearances aren't proof, but they are smoke worth following. Here's the theology in a single breath. If sin is the addiction to keeping yourself alive at any cost, then salvation is the decision to be food for someone else's survival, metaphorically, or, in martyr tales, literally. That flips the vampire from consumer to protector. The hunger doesn't vanish, it's transmutated outward, guarding the weak instead of feeding on them. I know it sounds like a Marvel arc pitched by a medievalist. But watch how the symbol follows the function. The twin drops forming a chalice to sources meeting to become a cup keeps reappearing on stones, in seals, in letters where the word reversal is underlined like someone was trying to tattoo it into time. Let's also check this against what keeps viewers watching so the ideas land. We've opened curiosity, we've defined stakes. If mercy can't be gate-kept, power shakes. And we've promised reveals, ruined chapel scorched ring, a snag-off casket note. In a few minutes, I'll give you a pattern interrupt, jumping to a modern story of someone who practiced reversal in a hospital corridor to refresh your brain's novelty meter. Hook to payoff alignment and periodic novelty are reliable watch time levers. Last thing for this scene, the phrase blood against blood is not an incantation. It's a choice to let my life close someone else's wound. If you've ever apologized without defending yourself, If you've ever paid a bill you didn't technically owe because it kept a family fed, if you've ever decided your pride was a cheap idol, you have already practiced a small liturgy of exile. And that more than vampires or vaults is what this story wants from us. The chapel sits behind the cloister like a secret the hill is tired of keeping. You can still smell wax, even though the last true vigil here ended centuries ago. Stone breathes slowly when it's been scorched. Every inhale a memory, every exhale a rumor. The wall over the altar is blackened, but not evenly. Fire had its reasons. Beneath the soot, a faint, rusted stain the shape of a tear. The locals say it never really dries, as if stone were skin and memory a wound. In the book, there's a line about a mark left by a figure of white fire. I'm allergic to pious special effects, but the description refuses to be cartoonish, not a person with feathers. Not soap opera holiness, just light where light shouldn't pour, holding a chalice shaped like bone. I stand where the floor shows a circle of heat like the ground wore a halo that burned it bald. You start guessing how to date a scorch mark like that. You wonder if some bored teenager with gasoline staged an illusion 100 years after the fact. Then the monk with the key, Brother Andre, who has perfect hands for opening doors nobody's supposed to remember, tells me a line passed down quietly. It came not to condemn but to call. Calling is not the same as absolving. Here's the unsettling proposal. The same place you fed your worst hunger is the place you might hear the cure inside the hunger. Not despite the darkness, but through it. That's what the manuscripts keep hinting. If sin is an appetite, God doesn't always starve it away. Sometimes he teaches it to feed something else. Skeptics checklist, because our job is to interrogate wonder. First, that teardrop stain. Paint, oxidation, iron-rich condensation. You can make the mundane sing if you give it a choir. And yet when physical traces persist in stories that don't need them to sell the myth, you have to at least nod at the coincidence. Second, the bone chalice detail. Macabre, sure, but it's also a thematic bullseye, the cup of life made from death's leftovers. Whoever wrote this thought in symbols that behave like math. Third, institutional response. The more ferociously a story is sealed, the more it tends to leak sideways. Here, heretical illumination is the label that ends the conversation while accidentally proving it was happening. We promised a pattern interrupt every 6,090 seconds to keep your brain awake, so here's one that tethers the medieval to the modern. A friend call, her Eleanor works nights in an ICU that sees its share of violence, overdoses, psych breaks, families who learn to shout before they learn to breathe. For a year she volunteered for the rooms everyone else dreaded. She kept a laminated card in her pocket with 2 sentences. I don't need to win this moment. I'm here so you don't hurt anyone else, including you. That's sanguis contra sanguinem in hospital scrubs. No miracles, no halos. Just a decision to be poured out where breaking usually spreads. She absorbed words that would have bounced around the unit like shrapnel. And the violence, weirdly, often lost interest. Her presence made a cup a place where fury met a boundary it couldn't cross without becoming smaller than itself. Back to the chapel. If Vlad knelt here, I grant that if 5 fat watts reported isn't thunder or thunderbolts. It's a sentence that could have been written on Eleanor's card. The blood you spill has chained you. The blood I offer will free you. Translation. You are owned by the way you survive. Change how you survive, and the chains don't fit anymore. On YouTube, this is the spot where most videos sag. We've given you the spooky set and a thesis. The temptation is to bask, but basking loses viewers. So we pivot forward and widen the stakes. Exactly the watch time. Move class creators, summarize, never signal we're done, change the angle, and keep a new reveal in sight. The reveal ahead. The people who tried to erase all this, because nothing puts oxygen on a story like the scent of the match that burned it. The index called it hybrid salvation. That's bureaucrat for you're making mercy our competitor. If you've ever worked anywhere with a brand manual thicker than the Bible, you know the reflex. When something threatens to solve the same problem in a way you don't control, you name it dangerous, and then you manage the danger. Why would any church suppress a theology that sounds like Jesus with extra steps? Because scope creep. If redemption reaches even the monsters without an authorized hand stamp, then indulgence sellers are out of a job, inquisitors become redundant, and hierarchies get asked the question hierarchies fear. Why are you here? I don't need a conspiracy corkboard for this. History is one long memoir of institutions protecting themselves from their best ideas. The liturgy of exile, those vow-keepers who practiced the reversal blurred the line between worship and imitation. Not just believe this, but bleed this. That's threatening because it makes you the place where doctrine happens. No gate, no ticket. We're not parroting the manuscript's claims. We're evaluating why such claims would be costly to the people who archive, bless, or bury them. That's new purpose and meaning. It's the difference between recap and critique with heart of transformation under fair use. Glasp's fair use explainers repeatedly stress that transformative analysis commentary, criticism, new context sits on safer ground than mere reuse. To understand the blowback, compare it to something modern that tried to swap revenge for revelation. South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission wasn't sainthood. It was an experiment, open confession, limited amnesty, public record. Imperfect, absolutely. But it operationalized the idea our manuscript keeps whispering. Grace requires record. You don't heal by forgetting. You heal by numbing so light knows where to enter. The churchmen who sealed the doctrine of reversal feared exactly this. Mercy that does not erase, mercy that remembers, mercy that can't be priced. They branded, they burned, they buried, but that never fully works. When you torch a text, you teach the smoke to go find lungs, and people remember what you tried to make them forget, because forgetting leaves undertow. From a viewer attention angle, we're stacking to rails now, the mythic angel chalice, vow and the practical ICU, TRC, record. Rail switching like this is a classic pattern interrupt, angle shifts, visual palette changes, even a brief cut to archival headlines. It wakes the eye and resets the ear, exactly the kind of variety Glasp's summaries point to when they talk about pattern interrupts, improving watch time. Next stop. The brotherhood they couldn't kill because it traveled by vow, not paper. Some orders carve rules into oak. The liturgy of exile carved theirs into their ribs. 3 vows. Silence, not mute. Purposeful quiet that turns listening into a weapon against chaos. Fasting from violence, not passivity. Refusal to feed the beast that keeps you feeling powerful. Carrying the enemy's sin, not denial of justice. Admission that someone has to absorb the blast, or it doesn't stop. Critics called it mocking the blood of Christ by imitating it, but that's a strange complaint. If copycats cheapen the real, then every act of charity is counterfeit kindness. The better reading is scarier. They were too literal, too on the nose about what it means to be shaped like a cross. Let's demystify carry the enemy's sin before it starts sounding like moral cosplaying. It means 3 practical things. Refuse the easy story where you're only a victim. Inventory the damage you've done, not to self-loathe, but to keep your righteousness from arming itself. Protect what they would destroy without becoming them to do it. Think shepherd, not avenger. Pay a cost you're not legally required to pay because cycles don't unwind themselves. A community center near where I grew up runs a Tuesday night circle that smells like bleach and basketball rubber. Victims and offenders sit with a facilitator and a whiteboard. Nobody is forced to forgive. Nobody is allowed to grandstand. On the board, they list the wound in plain text. Below it, a column titled, What It Would Take to Amend, The point is boring and holy. Keep talking until the imagination of revenge gets tired, and the imagination of repair wakes up. That's not soft on harm. It's hard on fantasy that your hurt will shrink if someone else's grows. The liturgy of exile understood what internet mobs keep proving. Punishment without reformation is just content. Mercy without record is just marketing. Silence, no subtweeting your enemies. No argument you haven't been asked for. No gotcha screenshots. Fast from violence. Don't forward the clip that reduces a person to their worst 10 seconds. Carry. Take one cost time, money. Predetto close a tiny gap you didn't have to close. As creators, we're doing a second fair use thing here. We're not just recounting. We're operationalizing the audience a way to test the doctrine in daily life. That's transformative, and it also helps retention by promising practical payoff if viewers stay. GLASP curation around audience retention is blunt. Hook with a promise, escalate with useful beats, very pacing. Don't signal we're done until the finish. One more reason vowkeepers scare empires. Vows outlive policy. You can ban a book. It's hard to confiscate a promise. Which brings us to their ledger, the one no fire could fully teach to shut up. Imagine a ledger written in red ink, each entry for lines. The sinner, the victim. The act, the atonement. Not a witch hunt. An audit, not to weaponize guilt, but to aim mercy. The manuscript fragments agree on one unsettling refrain under the final line: account not balanced. Think of it as spiritual accruals, debts acknowledged, interest compounding, some payments made, many not. The liturgy of exile believed grace requires record. You don't throw the book away when you forgive, you write paid on the page. And until it's paid, the wound stays visible so the light knows where to go. That's the theology. But it's also astonishingly modern. Post-conflict commissions, memorial wars, even neighborhood restitution agreements are always to say, we won't let forgetting cosplay as healing. When the fragments suggest Vlad had an entry penance begun, atonement unfinished, it lands less like myth and more like math. If the man really tried to reverse his hunger, the ledger won't lie. The numbers still won't add up. You can't resurrect 3,000, but you can refuse to let their absence be silent. A Balkan monastery keeps a post-war notebook, not sacred scripture, just sacred stubbornness. Farmers' names, soldiers' names, mothers' names. Columns for how it broke and what would mend, many lines end blank. But some have check marks, a scholarship fund here, a rebuilt roof there, an apology documented and accepted. The point isn't to settle cosmic accounts, it's to prevent moral amnesia. Pain Unrecorded loves to rebrand as destiny. From a videocraft angle, this chapter is where many viewers bail if we get preachy. So we add texture and specificity, the red notebook, the columns, the check marks, and we compress whenever the idea starts repeating. Variety keeps curiosity on a leash. Pattern interrupts angle changes, cutaways, prop close-ups, errant gimmicks. They're a form of respect for the audience's attention. GLASP summaries hammer this. Use strategic novelty, cut fluff, never telegraph the ending early. If the Book of Names insists account not balanced, then the story of Vlad, whether monster or penitent, is a cliffhanger history never resolved. Which is why folklore keeps raising him from the grave, narratives return when ledgers don't close. Next, what a 40-day fast from vengeance does to a man who built an empire on fear. Most redemptions we like are tidy. This one is sandpaper. The fragments sketch a regime of reversal by discipline, a sword buried in an altar, a vigil of ash and blood. A ledger of restitution, land returned, widows fed, prayers said for enemies by name. We're told his hair went white in months. Whether that's poetry or pigment, it reads like a body learning a new appetite the hard way. One report, if you believe it, says he warned his soldiers not to strike first. That sounds insane for a man nicknamed after impaling. But it makes doctrinal sense. If the curse is hunger that feeds on life, the cure is hunger that guards life, even at cost. The fast of the shadow is exactly that. Throttle the reflex that made you powerful. Starve the wolf with your own pride. Two objections deserve daylight. This is romantic myth-making. It might be, but myths are never arbitrary. They grow where wounds refuse to scar. A culture invents guardian vampires when it needs protection at the threshold between what it fears and what it still hopes to become. The pale guardian tales feel like a population trying to rehearse a world where its terror could be tamed by the very thing that caused it. Redemption cannot erase atrocity. Correct. The ledger agrees. That's the point of atonement unfinished. Redemption isn't deletion. It's direction. It says, I can't pay everything, but I can decide where my hunger points from now on. I met a man who ran a crew in a city where sirens are lullabies. He trained his temper young and rented it to whoever paid. In his 40s, a shooting he ordered left a kid with a limp and a grandmother with a face that never learned to smile again. Something split. He started paying for night patrols, then standing those patrols, then breaking his own code to testify when it would keep a younger man out of a casket. Friends called him a traitor to the old hunger. He called it late homework. That's all the doctrine of reversal is, late homework turned in with interest. From a YouTube craft angle, this is where we spotlight stakes and preview the final moral, but we do not say, in conclusion, we give a breadcrumb, a bronze casket, or wax seal, and a line to on the nose to fake in blood, peace, then cut. Snagov's ruins cough up 1,000 stories for every nail you can verify. But there's a pattern. Wherever this twin-drop chalice shows, there's also a whisper about reconciliation that came too late to be tidy. A ring engraved with the symbol. A casket sealed with wax sigils. A parchment that reads like someone trying to smuggle a confession through customs. Hide what must be remembered until the thirst returns. If you listen to folklore with only one ear, you'll hear fangs and capes. If you give it two, you catch the counter-melody. Threshold guardians, not predators, figures who stand between villages and the dark, bound to keep balance because they once destroyed it. Horror spreads faster than repentance in any media ecosystem, ours included, because fear is cheaper to shoot and easier to click. But people keep telling guardian stories anyway. They want a universe where the thing that hurt them can learn to help them. For our purposes, the word that matters is legacy, not the good PR kind. The kind you don't control. If the church locked the doctrine of reversal away, the doctrine learned to wear disguises. Folk hymns about beasts sleeping in mercy's grave, village coins stamped with drops, half-buried icons with two red teardrops that bleed when it rains because pigments, like memory, can be water-soluble. We're careful here. We neither canonize nor debunk. We practice responsible wonder. When evidence thins, we label it thin. When it thickens, we say so plainly. The point isn't to arm a conspiracy. It's to disarm the cynicism that assumes every hopeful story is a marketing stunt. Some are just stubborn truth that couldn't find a safe desk. We end where the fear lives. If mercy can visit monsters, then who do the righteous get to be? Empires, religious, political, corporate, algorithmic for enemies who never change. It keeps the maps simple and the budgets justified. The liturgy of exile blew up the map. Their scandal wasn't magic with blood. It was responsibility with blood. Pay what you can for the wound you helped open. And if you can't pay enough, pour out anyway. Here's your practice pack for the week 3 micro-reversals. The doorway move, step between escalating voices online or off. You don't need eloquence. Just change the physics, ask a question that cannot be shouted. The paid page, write one name in your own book of debts. Make a small payment, money, time, apology and document it paid today. The no win-win, in one argument, let go of being right. Choose being useful. Yes, your pride will howl. Let it. If enough of us do this, legends retire. Vampires become jobless. Not because evil vanishes, but because the economy that feeds it goes bankrupt. What you've watched is intentionally structured with hooks, pattern interrupts, and payoff escalators, so the message survives the algorithmic weather. Hook, thumbnail alignment at the top. Novelty beats mid-scenes, no early wrap-up language. And a final, specific call to practice. These aren't tricks, they're hospitality for attention.